Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our
Warriors. And paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's good to be back. We had a little break there. I had an extended break. Good to see everybody in chat. We have a great show for you today. If you could, please do hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Really helps us out. We also have social media on Twitter and Blue Sky. You can follow us there for different updates on things. And of course, we have our main website, Tochnyi.info. That's where we post all of our research and articles and stuff like that. So go to Tochnyi.info and check that out. Chat, if you guys have any questions, as always, you can ask in the chat box there, and we'll do our best to answer all your questions at the end. First, I'll present the news. That'll be followed by Mr. Germany to Ukraine, and then we'll have an update on the Russian economy with Stanimir, and I think we'll talk a little bit about horses, and then we'll go to Q&A. So I will now present the news. These are the main headlines as of December 28th, 2025. First up, we have operations. A senior Russian military officer, Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov, lost his life after an explosion involving his car in Moscow in the early morning hours of the 22nd of December 2025. The incident occurred near his home on Yasneva Street shortly after he entered his vehicle and began to drive away. Ukrainian security agencies have in past cases informally taken responsibility for targeted attacks against figures associated with the Russian armed forces or pro-Russian authorities. In this instance, however, Ukrainian officials have not acknowledged any involvement as of now. Other explanations have also been raised, including internal disputes, criminal retaliation, or operations carried out by Russian security structures themselves. The pro-Russian Telegram channel Shot reported that residents of the Orekhovo-Borisovo area were startled by a loud blast around 6:50 a.m. Moscow time. Witnesses described thick black smoke and intense flames rising from a courtyard where a Kia Sorento had been torn apart. Emergency services arrived rapidly, and rescuers initially worked to pull the driver from the wreckage of the SUV. Early information from Shot suggested that one person had survived the blast with serious head trauma. The outlet said the detonation happened only seconds after the driver entered the car and started moving. Subsequent updates revised the account as more details became available. Russia's investigative committee later confirmed that an explosive device had been concealed beneath the vehicle and activated once it was in motion. The agency stated that Sarvarov, who headed the main operational training directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, succumbed to the severe injuries he received in the explosion. Ukrainian outlet Militarny reported that the 56-year-old officer sustained extensive damage from metal fragments, broken bones, and injuries to the face. He was taken to the hospital in extremely serious condition, but did not survive despite medical treatment. Following the incident, the investigative committee announced the opening of a criminal case concerning a deliberate act carried out in a manner that endangered the public, as well as unlawful use of explosive materials. The investigators stated that they are considering several possible scenarios, including one pointing to Ukrainian intelligence involvement. Specialists from the committee's central office were sent to support the inquiry. Authorities reported that witnesses were being interviewed, security camera footage was under review, and forensic examinations had been ordered. Ukraine Special Operations Forces reported that on December 19th, they conducted drone attacks against a Russian patrol vessel and an offshore energy installation in the Caspian Sea. The patrol vessel was known as the Hunter type, which is part of the Rubin class used by the Russian Coast Guard. These ships are designed for duties in coastal waters and are intended to counter threats from the sea and air. The SSO stated that multiple drones reached and struck the vessel during the mission. During the same operation, drones were also directed at a Russian offshore oil platform located at the Filanovsky oil and gas field in the Caspian Sea. The installation is owned by the Russian energy company Lukoil and is used for extracting hydrocarbons. The SSO said the platform plays a role in producing oil and gas that are exported to contribute to Russia's state revenues, including funding for military activity. They added that the field's estimated original reserves amount to about 129 million tons of oil and roughly 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas. As of the announcement, details regarding the scale of the damage and whether the platform remains operational has not been confirmed. Ukraine's general staff reported that Air Force units carried out an airstrike on the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery in Russia's Rostov Oblast. The facility was hit directly, with several explosions observed after the attack. Officials said assessments were ongoing to determine how much damage the refinery sustained. Novoshakhtinsk lies close to the occupied section of the border with Donetsk Oblast, roughly 200 kilometers from the active combat zone. Its location places it within reach of long-range Ukrainian strikes, despite being well behind the front lines. Ukrainian military officials described the refinery as one of the main fuel suppliers in southern Russia and a key element in sustaining Russian military operations. According to the general staff, the site produces diesel fuel and aviation kerosene that are supplied to Russian forces operating in parts of occupied Ukraine. Following the strike, a large column of smoke was seen rising from the refinery and was visible from a considerable distance. Images and footage circulating online showed an ongoing fire at the site after the attack. The Ukrainian General Staff stated that on the night of December 24th, one of the targets hit was the Yefremov synthetic rubber plant in the city of Yefremov, located in the Tula region. The facility is known for manufacturing materials used in plastic explosive compounds and solid rocket fuel. Following the strike, detonations were reported at the site, along with a large fire spreading across the production area. In a separate action during the same operations, Ukrainian forces struck a storage and maintenance site used for unmanned maritime vehicles in the Mirny area of Russian-occupied Crimea. The facility was described as supporting the upkeep and deployment of the systems. Ukrainian officials stated that evaluations were underway to determine the level of the damage inflicted. In Russia's Volgograd region, the main Central Asia Center gas pipeline was taken out of service after an incident believed to have involved an explosive event, according to reporting by Ukrinform, citing a source within the Defense Intelligence Service of Ukraine. The source stated that on December 19th, an unusual collapse of the ground occurred near the settlement of Romanovka in the Olkhovsky district, leading to the pipeline's failure. Russian explanations publicly attributed the disruption to soil instability affecting aging Soviet-era infrastructure, which for decades transported gas from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. Ukrainian intelligence, however, indicated that visual materials obtained to the site point to a different cause behind the sudden damage. Although Russian authorities described the incident as limited in scale, emergency responders and specialized services were rapidly sent to the location. Ukrainian intelligence commented that the swift response contrasted with the claims of a minor event, suggesting the situation required immediate attention beyond maintenance issues. The Central Asia Center pipeline is a significant component of Russia's gas import system and has historically carried up to 12 billion cubic meters of gas annually. Since 2022, despite repeated official statements about a reduced dependence on external energy supplies, the pipeline has reportedly been used in reverse, with Russia purchasing gas from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to offset their own domestic shortfalls. Following the incident near Romanovka, gas transmission along this route has been halted with no timeline announced for the resumption. Ukrainian intelligence further stated that similar geological disruptions will tend to occur near infrastructure that supports Russia's military efforts, adding that actions against Ukraine would not go unanswered. So just to editorialize for a moment, if it wasn't clear, the Russians are claiming that this was a geological disruption. Ukrainian intelligence is confirming without any video evidence, but they're claiming that I would say they're heavily implying they were responsible. I guess they never outright claim responsibility, but there you go. During the night of December 22nd, unmanned aerial systems controlled by Ukraine's military intelligence carried out strikes on the Taman Neftgaz marine oil terminal located in Russia's Krasnodar region. The source said the attack affected multiple parts of the facility, including key technical equipment, the pier used for handling liquefied petroleum gas, and sections of the port's supporting infrastructure. The impacts led to a major fire that spread across parts of the terminal following the strikes. The Taman transshipment complex of oil, operated by Taman Neftgaz, is described as one of the largest facilities of its kind in the Black Sea area. Its storage capacity for petroleum products and liquefied gas exceeds 1 million cubic meters. On December 20th, Russian military personnel forcibly took around 50 Ukrainian civilians from the village of Khrabovske in Sumy Oblast and moved them into Russian territory. This was confirmed to Suspilne by the head of the village. She said that slightly more than 50 residents had remained in Khrabovske after previously submitting formal refusals to evacuate. Later that evening, Russian troops began removing them against their will. According to her account, no children were among those taken. On the same day, residents of nearby villages Ryasne and Lysne were evacuated with the help of volunteers from the International Red Cross and a Ukrainian police special unit known as the White Angels. Despite these efforts, available information indicates that only about 1/4 of the civilians who were considered at risk were brought to safety. Some residents chose to stay behind in their homes, even amid ongoing shelling and repeated warnings. It is currently unclear which specific Russian military units were involved in the removal of civilians from Kharkovsk. No official clarification has been provided regarding the forces operating in the area at the time. Earlier, Ukraine's 105th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported neutralizing members of the Russian special unit known as Senej, which has been carrying out incursions into Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts. A Ukrainian intelligence source told Suspilne that this unit follows an extremely violent initiation practice, under which members are expected to return from operations in Ukraine having caused at least one fatality, and they are said to include civilians in this practice. Up next, we have economy and aid. Leaders of the 27 member states of the European Union reached an agreement at a decisive summit to abandon the idea of financing support for Ukraine through a reparations-based loan and instead rely on collective borrowing. Under this approach, the bloc will raise 90 billion euros through joint debt to cover Ukraine's military and budgetary needs over the next 2 years. With the reparations loan set aside, EU institutions concluded that issuing common debt is a more straightforward and predictable option than attempting to extract funding from frozen Russian assets, a strategy seen as legally and financially risky. However, this solution comes with immediate costs, as borrowing on the markets requires servicing interest from the outset. Because neither the EU nor its individual member states currently have 90 billion euros readily available, the European Commission will raise funds by issuing a combination of short-term and long-term bonds. The money will be distributed gradually to ensure Ukraine receives consistent support, with the first installment expected as early as April. Ukraine will be allowed to allocate funds flexibly between military expenditures and budgetary needs. Interest payments on the borrowed funds will be covered by the EU budget, shielding Ukraine, which is already burdened by debt, from additional financial pressure. Based on current interest rates, the Commission estimates that the annual interest costs are around 3 billion euros. Over time, this would require roughly 20 billion euros to be set aside in the EU's next long-term budget, covering the 2028 to 2034 period. Members will share interest costs according to the size of their economies, with the largest contributions coming from Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Poland. Commission officials stressed that the 90 billion euros itself will not be counted as national debt for member states because the borrowing will take place solely at the EU level. The arrangement with Ukraine is structured as a non-recourse loan, meaning repayment would only be expected if Russia ends its invasion and agrees to provide compensation. Given Moscow's firm rejection of any such payments, the Commission is already planning for the liability to be rolled over repeatedly so that Ukraine is not forced to repay the funds directly in the foreseeable future. Officials indicated that the expectation is for the debt to remain in place until the reparations become available. This rollover is not expected to continue indefinitely. At some future point, the EU will need to resolve the status of the 90 billion euros to avoid perpetual interest payments. The EU budget is intended to serve as the ultimate backstop, ensuring investors are repaid regardless of political developments. This move became possible after Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic agreed not to block the plan in exchange for being exempted from its financial and legal obligations. These 3 countries will not contribute to the cost of borrowing. This concession was crucial because current EU rules do not allow the common budget to finance assistance to a non-member state without unanimous approval. In return for their acquiescence, the EU will use the Enhanced Cooperation Mechanism, allowing the remaining 24 member states to proceed without them. Their combined economic weight represents just 3.64% of the bloc's gross national income, meaning that the redistribution of interest costs among the other members will be limited. Once the necessary budget rules are changed and enhanced cooperation is activated, the 3 exempted countries also forfeit their voting rights on the regulation establishing the new assistance program, effectively excluding them from the initiative entirely. On December 22nd, the Council of the European Union decided to prolong the European Union's economic restriction measures against Russia for another 6 months, extending them through July 31st of 2026. The Council reaffirmed that the sanctions will persist until Russia ends its aggression against Ukraine. The sanctions were originally introduced in 2014, but were significantly broadened in 2022 following the full-scale military invasion. The current sanctions package covers a wide range of economic sectors, including limits on trade and financial operations, as well as restrictions affecting energy, technology, dual-use goods, industrial goods, transport, and luxury products. Ukraine has received 2.3 billion euros from the European Union after the EU Council approved the 6th payment under the Ukraine Facility Mechanism. The Ministry of Finance said the funds have already been credited to Ukraine's state budget through the Ukraine Facility Instrument. Of the total amount, approximately 2.1 billion was provided in the form of loans, while 200 million was allocated as non-repayable assistance. The disbursement represents the 6th regular installment under Pillar 1 of the financing framework. According to the ministry, the money will be used to cover priority social and humanitarian spending by the state, ensuring the continuity of essential public services during the ongoing war. To qualify for this tranche, Ukraine completed 8 reform measures required specifically for the 6th payment, along with 1 additional reform step linked to the conditions set under the 4th tranche. Ukraine previously announced that they had successfully implemented all required reforms for this step. Japan will extend additional financial assistance totaling nearly $6 billion to Ukraine in 2026, according to an announcement made by President Zelensky. The Ukrainian president said the decision had been taken by Japan's government and expressed gratitude for the commitment of further funding next year. The Ukrainian Interior Minister also stated that Japan had donated more than $60 million in demining equipment. Ukraine's defense minister held talks in Kyiv with Portugal's defense minister, during which Portugal confirmed it is prepared to contribute €50 million to the Pearl mechanism. This mechanism is used to facilitate the purchase of U.S.-made weapons for Ukraine. In addition to this contribution, Portugal committed to providing $26 million per year over a 5-year period through the SAFE initiative. These funds are earmarked for the acquisition of Ukrainian-made defense products, bringing the total planned support for Ukraine's domestic defense industry under this program to $130 million. As part of the same visit, the Portuguese Prime Minister also announced an additional contribution of over $500,000 to Ukraine's Energy Resilience Fund. Up next, we have international relations. After several weeks of negotiations, Ukraine and the United States have prepared a revised draft peace framework aimed at ending Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. The original proposal contained 28 points and was widely viewed in Kyiv as forcing major concessions, has been reduced and reshaped into a 20-point version. The updated framework was presented publicly for the first time on December 23rd by President Zelensky, who outlined its contents to journalists. Alongside the revised plan, negotiators also prepared a draft of a trilateral security guarantee arrangement involving Ukraine, the United States, and European partners. Also, a separate bilateral security guarantee agreement between Kyiv and Washington has also been drafted. Another accompanying document focuses on economic cooperation and is described as a roadmap intended to support Ukraine's long-term economic development. According to Zelensky, substantial progress has been made toward finalizing all these texts. The United States is expected to pass the 20-point draft to Moscow on December 24th, and should Russia accept the proposal, the final agreement would require signatures from the leaders of Ukraine, the United States, European representatives, and Russia. Despite reaching an agreement on most elements, Ukraine and the United States have not yet resolved disagreements over 2 key points in the revised plan. This includes future control over the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant and governance of the Donbas region, which has been heavily damaged by fighting since 2014. The draft also does not address Ukraine's ambition to join NATO. Ukraine's Central Election Commission has resumed operation of the state voter register, reopening the system for the first time since the full-scale invasion. This comes as discussion about the possibility of elections has intensified, driven by pressure from the United States. Ukrainian authorities have reiterated that elections are legally barred while martial law remains in force, and that ongoing combat, security threats, and the mass displacement of citizens prevent the organization of a credible electoral process. The Commission reported that restored functions of the voter registry currently cover interaction with citizens, including renewed access to its online portal. The database was taken offline shortly after the invasion as a protective measure aimed at safeguarding personal information and limiting exposure to cyber attacks. According to the deputy head of the Central Election Commission of Ukraine, the decision followed an extended period of technical and organizational work. These efforts focused on strengthening cybersecurity, improving data protection, and ensuring the resilience of election-related digital systems under wartime conditions. He said the Commission's goal has been to balance maximum protection of voter information with continued public access to essential state resources. Swedish authorities have taken a sanctioned Russian cargo vessel out of service after boarding and inspecting it during the night of December 21st. The ship, known as the Adler, is not permitted to continue its voyage unless prosecutors authorize it. The Adler experienced an engine malfunction on December 20th and dropped anchor off Sweden's western coastline. Following the incident, Swedish customs officers, working alongside the Coast Guard, boarded the vessel to conduct an inspection. The matter has since been transferred to a prosecutor at Sweden's National Unit for International Organized Crime, who will determine the next legal steps. The Adler has previously been involved in transporting Russian military equipment. Its owner, M. Leasing LLC, is subject to sanctions imposed by both the United States and the European Union. The restrictions were introduced after the country's vessels were linked to shipments of North Korean ammunition to Russia intended for use for the war against Ukraine. And last item this week, China's foreign ministry issued a sharp response on Tuesday after Ukraine announced plans to impose sanctions on Chinese nationals linked to Russia's military-industrial sector. According to reporting by Xinhua, Beijing urged Kyiv to promptly reverse what it described as an erroneous decision. Chinese officials framed their position as a defense of what they called lawful rights and interests of Chinese companies and citizens, including those involved in activities that support Russia's defense industry. Beijing's position cast the protection of these actors as a matter of principle rather than alignment with Russia's military campaign. The reaction followed an announcement by President Zelensky, who stated Ukraine is preparing a new sanctions package aimed at individuals cooperating with Russia's defense sector. He specified that the measures would not be limited to Russian nationals, but would also apply to people from China involved in supporting Russia's military production. Ukraine has previously imposed restrictions on Chinese firms accused of supplying components such as drone parts and military-related materials to Russia. The planned inclusion of individual foreign nationals represents a further step beyond earlier actions focused mainly on corporate entities. And that's it for the main news items this week. We'll now move to the next segment.
Hello guys, since we had or didn't have the stream last week, I will now present this week's and last week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine together. We are starting with new military aid news, which have been made public last week on Tuesday. According to a statement from Germany's Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, Germany will deliver a large number of AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles from Bundeswehr stocks to Ukraine in 2026. A day later, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Denis Shmyhal, announced that Germany and Ukraine have signed new agreements which guarantee the delivery of military aid worth 1.2 billion euros to Ukraine. The contracts include the long-term supply of spare parts for the Ukrainian Patriot air defense systems, funding for the production of Ukrainian UAVs worth 200 million euros, funding for the production of 200 Bogdana self-propelled howitzers on the Zetros chassis, so a new version, worth 750 million euros, the production of Ukrainian UAVs designed by Frontline Robotics in Germany in a facility run by Quantum Systems, and a constant supply of the latest electronic warfare equipment. Let's now focus on this week's news, which I all made public on Saturday, so yesterday. First, with 250,000 euros in financial support from the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, the German-Ukrainian association Blau-Gelbes Kreuz e.V. has delivered 9 high-performance generators and over 200 water containers to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. In addition, 2 modern firefighting vehicles were delivered to support 2 local fire brigades, which are responsible for the safety of over 20,000 Ukrainians. The German cities of Bergheim and Leverkusen, in collaboration with the same association, collected and delivered hundreds of gift boxes for children from Zaporizhzhia and Nikopol in separate fundraising campaigns for Christmas. And last but not least, and I sadly don't have images here, with 60,000 euros in financial assistance from the federal state of Saxony, the German Red Cross in Saxony recently delivered 9 high-performance generators for hospitals, schools, and shelters, as well as medical beds to the Kharkiv region. And that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. German Aid. So up next, we have Stanimir. Stanimir, I thought I'd ask you just a couple of questions about some news articles I encountered this week. I think the sort of general theme of the headlines relating to the Russian economy from what I was reading were about like Russia's ability to bypass the current global financial system. So the first story that I saw was that China imported a record 961 million US dollars in gold from Russia. And the economic data confirmed this would be a record amount. And this, according to this news story, it's helping Russia bypass financial isolation. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Russia right now has a lot of yuan, so it can actually trade with China. The problems they have is direct trade with banks, which is direct payments to banks, not trade, which is a problem for them. Only certain Chinese banks actually process transfers, but for that they've also had VTB, which is the Russian state bank, the second largest one in Russia, has a subsidiary in Shanghai that also caters to this and helps them. In terms of gold, I have to say that it might be a record amount that's being sent to China, but in terms of how much yuan and how much gold Russia has, it has a lot more. Just mining per year is around 340 tons, 350 tons in Russia. I think that amount is close to 4 tons of gold. So it's not that big an amount. And while it might help them a bit in bypassing restrictions, I don't think it's that crucial so far in terms of how they're doing business. They're actually decreasing their imports from China, and that's one of the reasons why the ruble is so strong. So I don't think it's helping them that much.
Okay, thanks. And then the other one is just about cryptocurrency. It said Russia's banned cryptocurrency as a payment. The Russian central bank implemented a ban on crypto payments to tighten financial control. So what are your thoughts on that story?
The Russian central bank doesn't want people to use cryptocurrency to buy directly things. What they have allowed in Russia in terms of investment and on the Moscow Stock Exchange is investing in futures linked to cryptocurrencies and indices. So it's allowed to exist as a form of investment in Russia, but Russia is still, at least the central bank is still not ready to accept it as a direct payment method, but it's not something that they've ruled out. So for now, it's restricted, but I don't think this means that it's banning cryptocurrency as a whole. And over the past year, the amount of cryptocurrency miners in Russia has risen by 50% to around 200,000. And I think they're still the largest cryptocurrency mining country in the world. So in that regard, I don't think cryptocurrency is going away from Russia. What they have done in terms of banning partially is in regions where they have issues with electricity, cryptocurrency miners are not allowed to operate anymore. So we're talking in the Russian Far East or in the Russian South, there you have bans on cryptocurrency mining. But the main cryptocurrency mining regions in Russia are in Siberia. So we're talking Irkutsk region, Novosibirsk region, that sort of stuff. So in that part of the Russian Federation.
Okay, thank you. And I think the next topic is horses. Something that, yeah, it's really been making the rounds this week. There was some footage published. It's a little disturbing if you're an animal lover. I'm sure the guys see worse every day when they're looking at videos of drone strikes, but the Russians have been using horses on the battlefield in a very direct way recently, and I don't know, it's clearly worth remarking upon. The internet has remarked upon it quite extensively, and I think a lot of people in our group are kind of are talking about it. So Erlend, why don't we talk about what footage we have about the horses first, and then we can maybe move to the bigger topic of the horse economy in Russia, etc. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there are at least 3 main videos that are, I think, all geolocated. They're just east from Huliapule, so that this is it's not spread over many locations. It's concentrated, which leads me to suspect that there is one unit that has committed to this, or at least partially committed to this. One of the things that makes me baffled when I see this is that they are generally walking straight over roads or fields, and they're using them straight on an assault, so approaching the front line. And it doesn't make any sense to me at all. Why would you use a horse to assault over a field or on a road in an open terrain in a drone saturated area? It just doesn't make sense. One of the things that you can see from the videos that are, I would say, common feature is that doesn't look like the soldiers on top of the horses are very good riders. Yeah. So, did you want to talk about anything more? I know Stanimir has a lot of information about horses in general, or he's been digging up some info.
Yeah, I think that's it for me. I just let's talk to Stanimir. So Stanimir, the horses are a bit small. So we were kind of curious about that, and just like, what can you tell us about horses in Russia and their ability to buy them and use them on the front lines of Ukraine?
So yeah, Russian horses are usually smaller than what you've seen if you're in America. I think the smallest breed, which can be these horses, is the Buryatian breed of horses. Overall, however, when it comes to regions close to Ukraine, what I've seen in prices for horses is relatively higher than in the price for used bikes. So we're talking something like 60, 70,000 rubles per horse. And those were relatively young ones. So a horse that's 10 months is not already ready to be ridden by anyone. The other thing is that you can also buy used Ladas, old Ladas, but still Ladas that are used. You can buy them for up to 50,000 rubles. And between 50,000 and 100,000 rubles, there's enough supply within the regions close to Ukraine that you can purchase an automobile and replace the horse with that. We also know that you can buy new bikes from Rego Moto. For those who are not aware, Rego Moto is the biggest brand for motorbikes in Russia. It's actually a Chinese company. That's their brand name in Russia. I'm forgetting their official name. They used to have a factory in Russia. They're big in Russia and Belarus, but the Russian motorbike market is relatively small, between 40 and 50,000 motorbikes. We're talking new motorbikes bought a year, but the prices for those started somewhere around 80,000 rubles for a motorbike, which is relatively affordable if you compare it to grown horses from farms. Because if you go into horses bred for equestrian sports, we're talking about, at least the ones I saw in Rostov, were over 1 million rubles. So the other thing that could have happened is they could have taken them from some military bases. They've grown horses in some of the ethnic republics near the military bases in those areas. For example, there's an equestrian tradition in Tuva. The military base there does grow horses. When it comes to horses in general, the closest region with a lot of horses would be Astrakhan and Dagestan. They have around 40,000 horses each. In terms of horses as a whole in Russia, the biggest growers are in Yakutia, which grow their own breed, which are stumpy, if I can describe them, and with long fur. There are specific horses that are bred mostly for meat, but they're also very resilient. So you can leave them in a pasture during winter and they'll dig through the snow and manage to feed themselves that way. They also are capable of withstanding around 60 degrees below zero in the outside, so they are suited for the Arctic. But they're also very expensive because they're bred for meat, and it's not a cheap thing. And I think prices there go for 200 to 300,000 rubles last I checked. I could be wrong; it could be even higher than that. But they're the biggest growing region with around 180,000 horses. When it comes to horses per person, I think the biggest region is Republic of Altai, which is not populated a lot by people. So there, per 100,000 people, per 100 people, you have 54 horses. Close to 113,000 horses are raised in the Republic of Altai. And the second after Yakutia is Bashkortostan with 125,000 horses. So they have places to get the horses in terms of growing, but horses are relatively expensive compared to what you can buy as a beat up car or a beat up motorcycle. Logistically, it also would be inconvenient to transport horses over these long distances because Bashkortostan is in the middle of Russia. Altaisky Krai is also relatively in the middle of Russia. Yakutsk is even further. Even Astrakhan and Dagestan are relatively far away. The one republic that I expected would have more horses, but it doesn't, is Kalmykia. It's also linked to the equestrian tradition. They have competitions with horses, but they have only 10,000 horses there. So relatively, Russia has an availability of horses to mount the entire army on horses. They have around 1.3 million horses, but it's very inconvenient, and I'm going to just flat out say stupid.
Yeah. It does not make much sense at all. I think everyone understands that from a tactical perspective, it most definitely does not make sense compared to a motorcycle. On a logistic point of view, it's also very strange choice because it takes a lot of work and resources to keep up horses. So yeah, it just doesn't make much sense, and I'm personally kind of angry, very angry, because animals do not have a choice. They are, not able to resist going to the front lines. Then they, of course, don't know what's happening there. So yeah.
And also, we have to say that in past ages, when horses were used in battle, they first were inoculated against noises and sounds and lights. This is something they're not doing. They're just grabbing horses and using them for assaults. And they would be spooked even by a drone and then would just push their rider off, because that's the natural thing that the horse would do. It won't run into fire. It won't run into an explosion, and it won't run into something trying to attack it.
Yeah. You would have to commit to quite extensive desensitization training, which will take a lot of time and resources as well. I'm sure you can train a horse to not be scared of a drone, but yeah. Oops. Someone went to sleep there. Yeah, I just look at this. It just does not make any sense at all. But please continue, Russia.
Yeah, it seems needlessly cruel in 2025 to subject a horse to the modern drone-filled battlefield. Doesn't seem from the footage we've seen so far to be particularly effective. And as you said, I think maybe the one thing you could say as well, if you're not on a paved road, a horse could be useful. But as you said, from what I can see, all of these videos take place right next to or on a paved road. So, they're not. It doesn't seem like they're using them for any special stuff. They're just throwing them in there, which is, as you said, pretty cruel. Maybe not in the grand scheme of things, or I shouldn't say in the grand. There's a lot of cruelty happening in this war, but this one seems quite unnecessary, I guess.
Yeah.
And as we've seen, these horses, their first instinct after something happens is to throw their rider and run away, just because they're not used to any of this.
No, obviously. Explosions, I think, is something that would require extensive training to avoid the horse reacting in the way that it's reacting in this video. You can see it just runs away and throws the rider off. And the rider flees, leaves the horse in the middle of the field.
He's like, I just saw a giant explosion. I'm done. Get off me.
Yeah, and just look at this clown, he cannot ride at all. Why? Yeah, I don't understand it. I really don't understand the whole idea. Someone is profoundly stupid and have committed to this, because we're seeing several videos of horses being transported. We see horses being used in assaults. All in 1 week. Some stupid Russian officer decided that this is a good idea. 2025 doesn't make any sense at all.
All right. Well, anyone else have any horse stuff? I think that's probably going to be the last we talk about horses for a while.
Who knows?
That's true. Maybe it'll catch on.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. Well, with that horse meme as our final horse related thing, let's move on now to Stanimir's update on the general Russian economy. Stanimir, we turn it over to you.
Yeah, so first I'll start with the news from a previous week, which was that the Russian central bank lowered the interest rate by 0.5% to 16%. The interesting part is that Nabiullina, the head of the Russian central bank, said that there may be a pause in the decrease of the interest rate in the near future. So they're not signaling that they're going to start decreasing it by 1 or 2%. They're actually signaling me that even a decrease by 0.5% might be too much for the next few months, which is not a good sign for the Russian economy as a whole. At least that wasn't what they were expecting. They were expecting a bigger rate decrease. At least the Russian Association of Entrepreneurs who were industrialists were expecting a bigger decrease of at least 1%, but the Russian central bank is staying firm. A part of the reason for that is that we immediately after that saw that the Russian inflation rate returned to 0.2% per week, which if you turn it into an annual inflation would be around 10%. So we might end up with 6% for the end of the year, but we might still have a jump of a few percent in the first quarter of 2026. When it comes to GDP growth, we had the data for November. So GDP growth in November for Russia slowed down to just 0.1%. December should be worse because nothing has improved in December. And it was a terrible month for manufacturing, as was November. November, if you had seen secondary data, for example, from the construction sector and construction materials that Yevgeny Stribin published recently, you can see that there the drops are in the 20 to 30% for a lot of items. So for a lot of industries that are linked to construction and for industries that are linked to the automobile production, the decrease is even further. If we come to the manufacturing output, which was published this week, I've left a screen for Erlend to grab. It's actually the other one. Yes, this was the first decrease since 2023 of the industrial output for Russia. So it decreased by 0.7%. And if you zoom in on the second picture, we can see that the only high growth industries are the Russian medication manufacturing industry with 14% growth, the Russian tobacco industry with 21% growth. However, I'm going to point out here that Putin is very much not a fan of vaping, so they might ban vaping outright in Russia, and that's a huge outlet for tobacco these days. And then when you come to the auto industry, which is suffering the most, we see a decrease of 45.3% compared to November of 2024. So it's not even close to recovery currently. Car production and truck production and bus production, more specifically, is down between 20 and 60%. The other interesting thing is that the increase of AFVs, the category that includes them, is just 6.4%. The previous month, it was up by 60%, I think. The increase of guidance systems or electronics that are used for drones and missiles is just 9%. We're used to seeing them in the 20s at the start of the year, in the teens in the middle of the year. And for ammunition, there's actually a decrease of 1.3%. This is the second month in 2025 where we have a decrease in the production of the decrease in the production of the sector that includes Russian ammunition. And we've also seen that in September. In August, we saw growth, but in November, we're down back to decrease in production. So I expect that Russian ammunition production has sort of plateaued and will not be expanded further without a huge increase in investment. And the other thing we know for the third quarter of 2025 is that investment actually decreased by 3.1%. So overall, things are going bad for the Russian economy, especially in terms of manufacturing and production of key goods. And you can see that the rest of the categories you have decreases for most of them by 10 to 15%. In some cases, you have even 25%. But overall, this is the trend that's going. And I think the Russian manufacturing sector is going to end up in a recession, even when you include the Russian defense sector into it. It's already been in a recession if you just look at the civilian sector. So also we had news that the net profits of Russian companies dropped by 9.9% for the first 10 months of 2025. And more specifically for October 2025, the decrease was 25%. So this is accelerating, and this means that there is less taxes in terms of the taxes on profits for Russian companies, and less budget revenue for Russia as a whole. Also, the losses that were reported by companies grew by 25% for the period of the first 10 months of 2025. So it's not just that people are reporting less profits, they're reporting even bigger losses. And if you look at the next picture we have that Erlend was first on, we have the oil taxes for 2025 so far. And you can see for December, they're close to 20% or more lower than any other month in the year. This is because for December, the tax was set using an Ural price of $44 and USD price of around $80, a bit over 80. And we expect that for January, the price they're going to use for the Ural oil will be close to $45 per barrel. And the price they're going to use for the USD is going to be probably around $78, $79 rubles per dollar. So I expect that the revenue from oil taxes is going to drop even further by another 15 to 20% in January. And I have to point out that the Russian budget currently is set expecting the price of oil to be around, the Ural oil to be around $59 per barrel on average for 2026. And because they have a cutoff point at $15, they stop collecting taxes from oil barrels. You have to think of it that actually it's not a decrease if the price of oil drops to $30. It's not, they're like getting half less money. They're getting actually 75% less revenue from oil taxes, direct oil taxes on barrels. So overall, for their expectations to actually hit their budget targets for 2026, I think they'll start the year with an even bigger deficit, and the deficit for 2025 will even be even wider than what it has been so far. So we're looking at probably over 8 trillion. And in terms of other major news, Russia has started inspecting Chinese car tires, and they found an excess of carcinogenic oils. But this has to be seen through the lens of Russian car tire manufacturers recently starting to complain that Chinese tire makers are getting a too big market share on the Russian market, and they're squeezing out Russian domestic producers. So the aim is to create eco tariffs for these carcinogenic oils and rise the prices of Chinese tires significantly so they can't compete with Russian tires, at least in the lower segments when it comes to cheaper tires. We've seen the same thing being done with trucks. We've seen the same thing being done with cars. So for years, they've managed to import Chinese car tires without any issue. They didn't do any inspections. Everything was okay. And now suddenly when Russian tire makers are facing difficulties, they find issues with Chinese tires and they introduce a new tariff. When it comes to Rostec's plans to build domestic airliners, now they have a new plan that they're going to deliver 12 SJ-100 planes in 2026. I have to say that that's very optimistic because there's so much work left for certifying that plane, even if it was just a replacement of the engine in several parts, and a lot of parts actually, with domestic ones, even though they used to build SSJs 100s with French engines. The other thing that's dubious with this is that all the time in their recent announcements, they've said they had 20 planes under assembly, which would be ready to be shipped as soon as the plane is certified. Now it turns out that we're talking about 12 planes, and also Russian experts on aviation have actually expected that the certification would take until 2027. We also have the same issue with the MS-21 plane, which now the Russian first deputy prime minister has come out and said that maybe the plane should be expected to arrive with domestic parts. Both the long and shorter version should be expected to arrive in 2029. Initially, it was expected to start deliveries in 2023, 2024. Now it's shifted to 2026, 2027, and now it's going to 2029. And I expect a similar thing will happen with the SJ-100 planes. The other important plane they're building, the small Baikal plane, which should carry 12 people. They've just now started testing for certification with the domestic VK200 engine and a domestic propeller. Up to now, all the work on that plane has been to use an imported propeller and an imported engine. So right now they're starting again from scratch to test it. And I expect that it will also be delayed by a few years because you don't certify a plane just a year after you started the initial testing of the engines on it. We also had airport restrictions this weekend. 270 flights were delayed at Moscow as Vnukovo and Sheremetyevo airports. 42 flights were canceled and 69 were redirected to land at other airports. We have also recently learned that when it comes to airline tickets, the number that are being returned by passengers has grown over the last year from 6 to 8%. And depending on which data you're looking at, depending on the airline, it's grown from 3 to 6%. When it is considered that the good medium is around 3% of returns, at 6 or 7%, they're starting to eat into the profit of the Russian airlines. We also had a letter sent by Rosneft's Igor Sechin, who criticized the idea of dealing with the fuel shortages by relaxing the requirements for quality and incentivizing mini refineries. According to him, this is counterproductive, and it would increase monthly output by just 100,000 tons, which they expect is just around 2.5% of production. And the other thing he did is he blamed fuel traders on the Spimex exchange, saying they kept the fuel prices high and bought up 75% of the gasoline and 80% of the diesel from the exchange. However, I have to say that there you have small volumes being traded, something like 30,000 tons a day. The bigger market is actually the physical markets, depots and refineries, where most gas stations are being refueled, though we have information that there was a lot of speculation on the Russian fuel market as prices were going at least on Spimex, by traders, and that's part of the reason why they introduced restrictions on how many bids you were going to make. But that again made it easier for traders to outbid smaller producers, smaller consumers like independent gas chains and independent gas stations. Now, when it comes to banking, this week we had a few news items. Russia's largest private bank, Alpha Bank, finished its acquisitions of the leasing company Europlan. It managed to purchase 87% of the company for 50.79 billion rubles. And this is the largest leasing acquisition in Russian history. Alpha Bank already has its own leasing subsidiary, so they'll probably become the biggest leasing company on the market. The November profits for Russian banks were also announced. They grew by 27% to 394 billion rubles. And for 2025, they've reached 3.4 trillion rubles in net profits, so they're close to reaching the same level as in 2024 or a bit higher. VTB, however, which is Russia's second largest bank and is also half owned by the Russian state, it saw its net profits for November fall by 37% to around 30 billion rubles. And we had data on the Russian total mortgage debt. In November, it grew by 1.4% compared to October, and compared to November 2024, it grew by 6.7%. So it's officially outpacing the inflation, or at least the official inflation, and it's growing steadily, even with the reduction of mortgages that are affordable, like the state preferential mortgage program that's no longer exists, because they extended the family mortgage program and the Arctic mortgage program to other types of housing that can be bought with them. In terms of gas and oil from commodities, we had a few news stories as well. The Russian Deputy Prime Minister Novak, who is in charge of oil-related subjects and deals with OPEC, said that Russia's oil production in 2025 will be either the same level as 2024 or a bit higher by 2% to 525 million tons, up from 516 million tons. He hasn't said anything about fuel production, and that statistic is still classified, so we don't know anything about that. But in terms of oil production, they seem to be producing as much as before, but as we know, they're getting a lot less money for the oil they export and the oil they sell. And Gazprom expects that in 2026, the revenue it has from selling gas will increase by 8%. And I want to point out that linked to this is that the Russian gas prices, domestic gas prices, will be increased in 2026 by 9.6%. And they were increased by a similar amount in the end of the first half of 2025. So that's one of the ways they can have their gas revenue increase by 8% by just government raising prices. When it comes to industrial needs, I think the increase is closer to 40%. The 9.6 is for used by households and not used by industry. In the construction market, we had also a few news stories. When it comes to investments in real estate in 2026, we keep getting news that they're going to be lower than 2025. Currently, the latest figure is that they're going to be 30% lower, reaching 650 billion rubles. And in Moscow, they're expected to drop by between 23 and 31%. So by either 450 or 500 billion, there'll be either 450 or 500 billion rubles. And yes, Moscow is that big of a market for Russia when it comes to real estate. And it's mostly because of the prices of property in Moscow, but not entirely just because of that. And the Russian Deputy Prime Minister, Husnulin, who used to be the construction minister before that, says that the Russian construction sector is going to collapse if the volume of issued mortgages in 2026 drops below 4 trillion rubles. And I have to point out here that the volume of issued mortgages in 2025 is only 4.1 trillion rubles. So if they stay at the same level or are reduced slightly, though that's not certain right now because the interest rate is going down. But if they are reduced slightly, you might see a real collapse of the construction sector, and that will have a knock-on effect on the construction materials sector and also on steel makers, which are dependent on Russian domestic steel consumption, not so much on Russian exports of steel, which are now in competition with China. We also had news that the cost to rent warehouses in Moscow and Moscow region dropped by 16% in 2025. And it's expected that there will be another drop of 5 to 10% in 2026 because there is a lot less demand right now for warehouses. Warehouses at the start of the year were one of the better performing construction sectors, especially for Moscow, because there was a lot of demand by retailers and online stores. Right now, that's mostly evaporated. The focus of retailers is to regional warehouses for their regional outlets. But that will probably also subside as the boom that was caused by the growth of online marketplaces has now mostly ended. So we should expect the warehouse construction sector to also be doing worse and be probably close to the levels of the housing construction sector. And finally, for construction, we have news that for 2025, analytics data from Xi'an cites that in cities over 500,000 people, the prices of housing on the secondary market rose by 8% to around an average of 147,000 rubles per square meter. That's close to, I think, $2,000 per square meter. The rise in the secondary market is because the primary housing market has become too expensive, and I started to see a decrease and then also an increase in the secondary market, and also because some mortgages that are preferential with government support are going to be allowed to be used for the secondary housing market and not just for new housing. When it comes to interesting data points, here we have several stories. So for the first 11 months of the year, the number of licenses issued for selling strong alcohol to retailers and catering establishments in Russia decreased by 27% to 10,500. And this is linked to the increased price of alcohol. And this will only continue because prices of vodka, brandy, and whiskey, the minimum sale prices that are regulated by the Russian Ministry of Finance, have been increased again by a greater amount than expected. And also the duties on them were increased again by a higher amount than expected. So a lot of people are going to be priced out, and people will buy less, at least in retailers or restaurants. And we might see, again, an increase in the use of unofficial alcohol or black market moonshine, which usually leads to deaths in Russia, especially among the poorer parts of Russia. We also had news that Russian Post fired around, not fired, but had around 40% of its workers quit due to low wages. And its response to that was that the turnover of staff was 42.9% in 2024. And in 2023, the company had 280,000 workers, and now it's down to 200,000. So they're essentially saying it's not the case, but partially confirming that the turnover is too high and people are quitting in mass from Russian Post because of the low wages. Also, Russian Post recently had issues with debt. It couldn't service, and it's reporting losses. So they are going to levy a tax on online marketplaces to boost the profits of, not the profits, but to boost the subsidy for Russian Post, which it gets from the government. And that's the way they expect to balance the budget of Russian Post. But I don't think that will be enough for now. They have to go in with a subsidy. And for those who don't know, for certain parts of Russia, Russian Post is the only carrier that's delivering goods there. And that's why it's unprofitable for them to continue to operate like that. But it's a state company that's supposed to do the state good and not focused on profits. And it should get state support. But with the money going to the war, that's not possible anymore. We also had news that the Ministry of Industry and Trade is proposing to defer the payments of the recycling fees for Russian auto manufacturers. So what they're saying is that they're going to defer the payments for the next 12 months, or next 9 months, plus the last quarter of 2025, to be paid after that, in a way to stimulate Russian domestic car and truck producers and bus producers. Meanwhile, Chinese companies have to pay them upfront. So that's why you get every year, at the end of the year, before the new recycling fee goes into effect, you have a rush and a queue on the border to import Chinese cars so they can stock up their dealership warehouses for the remaining year, or at least for the next several months, so they can sell at a competitive price. And we had news from Moscow, this time in the prestigious area of the Patriarch's Pond, where 16 restaurants have closed down this year, and the vacancy rate in the area has for lots to rent has risen from 5% to 11%, with the share of closed restaurants being 76% of the total. So the next sector we're expecting to have a big problem in Russia are going to be the restaurant and catering sectors. They had a decrease of, for Moscow, restaurants had a decrease in the number of purchases by 9%, and for Russia as a whole by 5%. in December, and the one saving grace they have is that the average purchase rose by 13%. The only sector of the catering, the only part of the catering sector that is actually doing well is the fast food segment, which saw its sales grow by 8% for Russia as a whole and by 6% for Moscow. But this is the thing that you should focus on when it comes to the next sector that's going to have significant difficulties. It's the restaurant sector in Moscow and the restaurant sector in Russia as a whole. They are going to have difficulties selling over the next year with prices increasing and people starting to decrease their spending, as we've already seen in things like the Sber index on consumption. The final part of the interesting data points for this week is that a part of the Russian National Welfare Fund will not be spent on financing the deficit. They're going to set aside 25 billion rubles from the liquid part to fund a new 3-year-long helicopter leasing initiative. They're planning to buy, I think, around 70 helicopters from the Kazan helicopter plant. Specifically, we're talking Mi-8 helicopters, which are used by regional airlines for shorter routes. And this is how people are getting by from more remote areas in Russia with smaller airfields. They're usually using helicopters. But again, this is basically a way to keep demand for the Kazan helicopter plant's Mi-8 assembly line, because there's not enough demand otherwise in the industry to buy new helicopters without leasing support from the government and from the state leasing company. Finally, we have the inflation and debt for this week. The inflation, official inflation as reported by Eurostat for the period of the 16th to the 22nd of December was 0.2%. So for December, the inflation rate rose to 0.31%. And for the year so far, it's up to 5.58%. However, I should point out that it will be at almost 6% hadn't they readjusted the inflation rate in October with that bogus announcement that they're readjusting the monthly inflation because foreign tourist trips were cheaper for Russians, hence the inflation in the country is lower. Somehow, I don't know how that works. And the final 2 points are for the auctions they held most recently. So for the first auction they held, they managed to sell 64.5 billion rubles. The yield was 14.9%. And the second auction, they managed to sell only 20.7 billion rubles in that, and the yield was around 14.8%, 14.79% to be exact. And I think that's it. That's all from me for this week.
Thank you, Stanimir, as always. Stay tuned every week, guys, for updates from Stanimir on the Russian economy. So up next, we just have the general stuff that I wanted to talk about. We'll start with the most nothing burger one, I think. Mr. Germany, I think you follow this a little closer than me, but while we were doing the pre-show meeting and while the stream was going on, there's been, of course, a lot going on at Mar-a-Lago. The President Zelensky and President Trump have had I guess you call it a summit or a meeting. But from what I can tell, like nothing of substance has been disclosed to the public so far. Trump made a few statements, but they sound basically like the statements he's always making, basically, and by the way, took a phone call from Putin like an hour or two before the meeting with Zelensky, which is a pretty common tactic of Putin to try to like undermine meetings with Zelensky. But he didn't, as far as I could tell, it went better than we could generally expect. In other words, he wasn't like saying bad things about Zelensky in front of Zelensky, which I guess is good. He said he was like brave and like was fighting for his country, and he thinks Zelensky wants peace and Putin wants peace. So that's kind of the mode he's in right now. It's like neutral optimistic, I guess you'd call that. We've seen this before from Trump. I don't think there's anything like new going on that he said or in his demeanor. And then it was going to be in front of the news media. But, well, I don't know how much of it was planned, but basically he dismissed the news media like maybe 20 minutes ago, and said basically we're going to talk in private for a while. So nothing's come out of that yet. There might be some things that will be said afterward, but my hot prediction is that we're just going to hear Zelensky say, "Oh yeah, I had a best meeting I've ever had with Trump." That's usually what he says. It was an incredibly productive meeting, the most productive meeting we've ever had. I think Trump will say the same thing. He'll say, "Oh, it was a great meeting. I think everyone's ready for peace, et cetera, et cetera." I'd be surprised if like something new came out of this. But Mr. Germanet, did I miss anything, or did you have any alternate takes?
Yeah, I don't think you missed anything relevant. I mean, it's yeah, I don't know what people expect to come out of this meeting. So yeah, it's a nothing burger. Trump was very dismissive, in my opinion, in the statement and or in the short statement he made prior to the meeting itself, together with Zelensky, in typical Trump fashion. But yeah, that's just business as usual. So yeah.
Yep. So we might be surprised by some kind of result that is announced from the private meeting, but I think chances are it's just gonna be more of the same. So I think so far at least nothing burger. Hopefully we're proven wrong, and there's some progress made that isn't to Ukraine's detriment. Okay. Anyone else have anything they want to say about the Trump, Putin, Zelensky talks? Trump, Putin, Trump, Zelensky, I guess.
One thing to note maybe is that I wonder if both the US and Russia did not expect the EU to commit to the 90 billion loan for 2026 and 2027 to Ukraine. So I wonder if they had expected a lot weaker Ukraine, or a Ukraine with a lot less cards on hands, as Trump likes to say.
Yeah, it's possible. I guess the one other thing I could mention is that on the phone call with Trump and Putin, apparently, at least according to Trump, Putin said that he wasn't interested in like a ceasefire. Basically, he thought that a ceasefire would just, and Trump said he agreed with him. Again, I don't know for what it's worth. That like a ceasefire would be just like a opportunity, or it would result in a conflict later or something like that. So I think it's possible, as you said, Erlend. It's a good segue into my next topic, actually, which is this 90 billion loan. I mentioned in my news report kind of the technicalities or the mechanics of it. It's definitely a really big deal. Like, I don't want to undersell it as a big deal. I think, we discussed this back in like November, and I mean, I think it's no coincidence basically that Ukraine had a $45 billion shortfall in their budget, and that's what was promised for the next 2 years, $45 billion for this year and next year. And that will prevent Ukraine from having a budgetary insolvency crisis for the next 2 years, which is like, obviously good news. If that money hadn't been given to Ukraine, I think we were really staring down like a real budgetary. It would either be a budgetary collapse or it would be a budgetary slimming down so severe that Ukraine would be a lot weaker. So it's a big deal that 90 billion was secured. It was done through a mechanism that I thought was pretty much the route that was going to happen once the full discussion was had about the frozen assets. The only relation this 90 billion has to those frozen assets is they sort of reserve the right at some point in the future to put those on the table as maybe a way to repay them, something like that. But I mean, overall, this is a big deal for Ukraine. As I said, Ukraine had a 45 billion shortfall. They're basically taking all of their own domestic tax revenue and they're putting it towards the war effort, military salaries, military equipment, and so forth. That basically leaves a giant gap where all the civilian spending is supposed to go: hospitals, schools, things like that, right? So the European Union picking up the tab on that stuff is a really big deal. And it really, like, I can't stress enough how important it was for this to happen. Without this happening, I think that Ukraine would be in a really, really difficult position. That being said, it's no coincidence that this is like the bare minimum. Like this is not what Ukraine needs to win. 90 billion sounds like a lot, but at the end of the day, this is what they needed to plug their huge budget deficit. They still are going to need, if we want to see real progress on Ukraine's side in the next year, they're still going to need significant either direct military aid or investment in their own defense industries to increase their production capacity to like allow them to stabilize, I think, the situation on the front line. So I think you're right, Erlend, that it's a big deal. Like, I think Trump and Putin both definitely noticed it, because without that money being secured, Ukraine would be in a much more difficult position, and potentially they would have to acquiesce on some level to certain demands just to have the war end. I don't know if I think Ukraine probably wouldn't either completely collapse or surrender, but they would have been in a much, much worse position in terms of negotiations. So I think that definitely played a role, at least to some extent. I don't know if it like changed anything, but I think it was on everyone's mind.
Yeah, and it kind of resets a lot of the pressure that Russia has managed to push through the US on Ukraine. But I'm not sure whether Trump is going to consider this for a very long time. But the Russians will have to, right? So I think the whole frozen assets discussion was very destructive, because it's good that this money has, been secured now, but Ukraine basically lost half a year where they could have focused on other things, but they had to focus on trying to secure the two next year's budget deficits for the last 6 months. I think that the Russians would very much like to get a hold of the frozen assets, but at the same time, I think that Ukraine receives these 90 billions, or potentially could have received more money, was more a concern for them than them actually getting back the frozen assets right now. So it's the bare minimum, but now at least Ukraine will be able to focus on lobbying its allies to invest in the rebuild or build up of the Ukrainian defense, as was mentioned in the report from NUPI, the Norwegian report, about how much it would cost for Ukraine to be, or how much it would cost the allies to put Ukraine in a position where they're actually stronger than Russia. I think we are we're not even putting a dent in that number yet. So yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts on the 90 billion? Okay, next item I think is mostly Erlend. Erlend, we've been getting some news from the front lines lately. It basically amounts to, if I, as a layperson, just looked at all the headlines, it seems like kind of a back and forth. Ukraine withdrew from Sieversk, which apparently is quite bad. And then Ukraine retook Kupiansk, which is good. So I don't know. Do you want to talk about like what's going on with the front lines, specifically Sieversk and Kupiansk, but anything else you want to talk about? Erlend, I think you're muted.
Oh, God damn it. Yeah. So the fact that they withdrew from Sieversk itself may not be the problem. The problem is, as Andrew explained to us in private earlier, the whole command and control situation is apparently very bad. There may be some miscommunication, or basically the local commander may have been untruthful about his reporting of the situation to the higher ups, which is a if that is the case, and that has led to extensive problems defending the line here, and you see there are basically 3 new penetrations, one just south of Sieversk and 2 more further south. If those happened because of basically untruthful reporting from the commander, that is very serious. And it's not just because of this incident, but it's because it's a repeating pattern that has been continually happened since 2022 in the Ukrainian military. And this, yeah, that I guess that's what you wanted to talk about, Joseph.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, really, for me, it's just that I see in the headlines like these stories like Ukraine withdraws from Sieversk and Ukraine retakes Kupiansk, and I'm, just trying to get a more in-depth understanding of like what's actually going on.
Yeah, so that's the, as far as I can go into the Sieversk situation. I know that it's a very difficult area for Ukraine right now. The Russians are focusing on Sieversk. Potentially, this can create complications for a lot of other very important cities like Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and obviously also Liman. So stopping this Russian advances here will be incredibly important. If we go to Kupiansk, we did quite an extensive reporting on this a couple of weeks ago, but the news from Ukraine, and it's also backed up by quite a lot of geolocated evidence, because the Russians are now actually bombing a lot of the locations, both with drones and aerial bombs and artillery. The locations where they were they had some presence left in Kupiansk. It's only less than a week ago since the Russians repeated again on state television with the general staff and Putin that they had complete control of Kupiansk, and that everything with regards from what Ukraine has said about this and reports that Ukraine has retaken Kupiansk are lies. Obviously, that's been proven to be not true. And actually, the Ukrainians seems to have been able to push most of the stragglers out, either capturing or defeating them, which I think was more or less inevitable. If you go back, you may see some of the. I think Andrea has just marked everything as gray for a long time now. So yeah, but yeah, there were specifically 2 locations where there were some evidence of Russian presence left until last week. Yep.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. I guess the general summary of the frontline situation is like Russia is still slowly advancing in certain key areas like Sieversk, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Obviously, the most concerning thing has been sorry, not Mirnorad, but Huliapule, where the city seems to be lost. There has also been a lot of chatter about poor command and control in this area. There's been a lot of complaints for months about the situation when it comes to command and control. The Russians managed to actually take over a Ukrainian headquarters in Huliapule, and it had not been cleared out, which means that the Ukrainians were not at all prepared for a Russian assault and did not manage to remove their stuff from their headquarters, which is really bad, of course. So this, for me, is the most concerning area. I know a lot of people are more concerned about the situation in Sieversk because potentially that can put all those other cities north of Sieversk in a very difficult tactical situation. But I'm very concerned about the speed of the developments around Huliapule.
Okay, well, thanks, Erlend, for that mini update. Hopefully, the news gets better, and yeah, we'll keep everyone posted as best we can. Cool. So
I just want to I just want to note that there are some good things happening as well. It's not all negative, especially of course the liberation of Kupiansk. There may have been some positive development for Ukraine north of Pokrovsk or northeast. Not sure if the reporting is true, but there is at least some of the evidence that Ukraine managed to clear out a couple of villages just northeast of Pokrovsk, which is very important if you want to extract the people that are in Mirnograd. But there is no evidence that they have managed to do that yet. But so that there is a little bit of positive news from this area as well. I would note that it is very important for Ukraine to establish a new defensive line here and stop the Russian progress towards Dobropilya, which would be the next objective for the Russian in this direction. I would assume.
yeah. So yeah, thanks, Erlend, and yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. So I guess that brings us to questions in chat. I'm not seeing a ton. I did want to ask Mr. Stanimir. Stanimir, what is Putin's stance on vaping? Could you elaborate a little bit? Is he just doesn't like it, or is it more? Does it go deeper than that?
He doesn't like it, and he's spoken that he is in favor of banning vaping in Russia as a whole if such laws are being introduced on the federal level. So what that sparked is local laws banning the sale of vapes and vaping in regions. So yeah, his stance on that is that he is pro banning all vaping in Russia as a whole, the entire sector.
Is that I don't know, because he kind of is against smoking and drinking too, right? Is it just kind of all one thing to him, or does vaping represent some kind of special threat?
Vaping is something he wants to ban entirely. He hasn't spoken in favor of, for example, the dry measures in Vologda. He hasn't spoken so much about the attempts by other regions to limit the hours during which you can buy alcohol. But for vaping, he came out and said, yeah, he's for a ban. If it comes to as a law, he'll sign it. So yeah, that's for vaping as a whole. Not so much for tobacco or alcohol. Those are being reduced by other measures, but they're not being banned outright. But vaping can be banned in all of Russia.
Yeah, I guess it's new, so he probably doesn't like that. I think he's a little bit skittish about technology in general, but yeah, I was just curious about that. Okay, so yeah, first question is what is the economic area that will be hurting Russia the most, I assume, for Stanimir?
I think that will be hurting Russia the most will be probably the combination of the construction sector and the steel sector, because those two declining and decreasing and going into collapses, as been pointed out, will hurt the biggest part of the Russian economy. So yeah, even though other sectors are declining, these two in a combination will be the biggest issue for the Russian economy going forward. And we have, like I said, the Russian deputy prime minister who's focused on construction is saying we're nearing a collapse of the construction sector, which resonates for the next several years. So if you're building an apartment building, you want to look for land now so you can start building and getting the permits by the middle of next year. And so you can commission the building fully built with finishing in another 2 or 3 years. So if that happens, if you have a decrease in the permits, and we have seen a decrease in the permits issued for construction, we'll have a shortage of housing within the 2 or 3 next years. But the problem is that with the interest rate so high, there's not so much of the demand to buy that much housing anyway. Even with the interest rate being decreased to 16%, there's still not that much demand. Most of the mortgages that are taken out with a preferential family mortgage. That's the only way they're doing it. Unless it falls down to below 11-10%, I don't see a revitalizing of the market when it comes to the market mortgages. People who are taking out market mortgages, which are now at around 20%, they're taking out just so they can buy the apartment, and then they can soon sell their previous apartment and then cover the mortgage and get out of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you would have asked me, I would have said the oil industry, but I can see definitely the case you're making that there's so many knock-on effects when you start destroying those two industries that it's a lot harder to kind of get all that working again versus the oil industry. So
Yeah.
Good choice.
Oil industry can recover as soon as sanctions are lifted. The construction sector doesn't recover in 1 year. And also they have a shortage of construction workers, even as it's collapsing. So even when it's collapsing, they don't have enough construction workers to build what they're building. So yeah.
Yeah, good points. See the next question. Yeah, I think that's the next question, Erlend. What is the progress of Ukraine's ballistic missile development? Neptune 2, Sapson, any more updates on flamingos? I think probably Colby, you might be the most qualified to answer this. I could take a stab at it, but I'm dumb. It's probably bad for me to try.
I recall Zelensky made a statement somewhat recently that regarding a wide variety of different missiles that Ukraine is currently using operationally, but details remain scant. I will say that Flamingo is not a particularly impressive system overall, based on the available information that myself and John and Fabian have been aware of. So it remains important for Ukraine to receive access to Western cruise missiles, which are actually effective, because the one-way attack UAS are just not particularly effective, don't deliver effective mass on target. And again, Ukraine's indigenous missile programs are having mixed success and have suffered due to underinvestment for a very long time. And that's not a problem that's going to get fixed overnight, even with additional capital coming in. So we shouldn't be putting too many hopes on that.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing worth mentioning is they recently released a little bit of footage of the manufacturing process for Flamingo, and I don't know, seemed kind of interesting. It surprised me they showed as much as they did. I guess that was like I was worried, I guess, but yeah. Aside from that, I haven't seen any developments. Erlend, do you want to say anything about that topic?
Well, we've seen very few instances of the Flamingo being used, and none of them are very impressive, to say the least. So that, I guess that's, it says a lot when they've been boasting so much in the media about this, specifically Firepoint, but not the government. So not official sources, not the military. And then suddenly we see absolutely no evidence that they're using the Flamingo. So that points me to believe that the Ukrainian military is not satisfied with the performance of the missile.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate for people that, for whatever reason, have continued to miss this point. Flamingo is not a missile program that is sponsored by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. That's a totally private venture by Firepoint. The Ukrainian MOD's own programs are things like long-range, quote-unquote, Neptune, which is not, has very little in common with Neptune to begin with, but that's basically what it's being called. Sapson, of course. There are others as well that are official Ukrainian MOD-sponsored development programs, and those are more promising than Flamingo, but as I said, they all still have a lot of challenges, and that's why things like Taurus and things like Tomahawk, JASSM all remain very important things that Ukraine continues to need, and there's not nearly enough emphasis on this, because Ukraine is going to lose if the conversation continues to focus on getting them very scarce air defense interceptors. The whole frame here has to change to a much more offensive mindset, because Ukraine will not have any sort of good outcome if they just continue to defend only and not retaliate. And their ability to retaliate, we've seen there have been lots of successes, but still not on the scale that there needs to be. As I said, one-way attack UAS are just pretty unimpressive and not particularly effective, and just not at all a substitute for well-constructed cruise missiles.
Shoot the archer, not the arrow, as they say. Okay, so yeah, I think that's a good place for that. And then, is that burnt train still blocking the rail between Melitopol and Mariupol? What came of the second rail construction closer to the coastline? Any other rail updates? Sounds like Jay questions to me. Erlend, do you know anything about this stuff?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to answer too deeply about it because I haven't done any investigation, but I do think Jay had mentioned maybe a few months ago that the train has been cleared, but I cannot vouch for that. We need to ask Jay.
We'll ask
about
Jay to give everyone a train update.
Yeah, people enjoy these train updates, so we'll have to ask him. Yep.
Yep, sounds good. Yep, there's another rail question. Have hits on the rail system taken a backseat to hits on the oil sector? Yeah, I think so. I saw 2 weeks in a row they did strikes on trains or rail, logistics stuff, and we haven't seen any of those from Ukraine recently. So it seems like they maybe aren't focused as much on the trains as they were for that one little period. Yeah, I don't know. Erlend, anything?
You can ask Daniel about that as he arrived, because he's been looking a lot into deep strikes.
Yeah, the question, Danielle, was I noticed I don't know, about a month ago there were 2 in a row, like 2 weeks in a row where Ukraine hit trains in Russia. And it seems like they've that's slowed down. They're not doing that as much. But am I incorrect?
Daniela?
He muted himself, so probably not there. Still needs time.
Sorry, I had some technical issues.
Hello. Could you hear the question, Daniela?
No, I had a problem with my headphones, so I wasn't able to listen to anything. I saw you guys speaking, but I wasn't able to listen to the question.
Okay, no problem. The question was, about a month ago, I noticed a little bit of a pattern there for like 2 weeks. Ukraine was targeting trains in Russia. But to my knowledge, that pattern has kind of slowed down. Is that correct, or have you seen any strikes on trains recently?
So for what regards your observation is absolutely correct. We have seen slow down all the long-range activities, despite there have been a few on different type of target. But on trains, yes, we can see that even from the data that we are constantly collecting, there's been a substantial increase during the summer period and in autumn. But essentially, most of the strike have been conducted in that period. Now it's very minimal.
Okay,
and
thanks.
the reason for that still a speculation, so we're still working on that.
Gotcha. Okay, and then we got a couple more questions here. So yeah, I actually forgot to mention this in my news report, but the strike on Novoshakhtinsk, which, by the way, Ukraine hits that place all the time. It's like one of the main places I just hear the word Novoshakhtinsk, and I'm like, oh, they hit it again. But this time it was a Storm Shadow, and that was like a big part of the reporting. To my knowledge, they have used Storm Shadows before, but I've never seen it as prominently reported. I think the Ukrainian government confirmed it, which maybe was significant, but I don't think it's the first time they've used a Storm Shadow on Russian infrastructure in Russia proper. Is that correct, Erlend, or no?
I think Daniela is better suited to answer the question,
Right,
but
yeah, sure.
it's not the first time they have hit targets in Russia. But when it comes to civilian infrastructure, I don't know.
True, yeah. Danielle, do you know they've used Storm Shadow inside Russian borders before, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You may remember the strike on the command center in Kursk. That was a perfect example on why Storm Shadow was idealized since its beginning. So very high precision, very low observability, and significant warhead capable of breaching through bunkers and delivering large damage with a contained warhead dimensions. So aside from some particular strikes, yeah, it has been a bit not hidden, but never publicly publicized. So there was never like an announcement, oh, we use Storm Shadow, probably because at the time the appetite for this type of announcement was very high. At this point, maybe there is also a shift in the European government in terms of showing also to US that Europe is leveraging on their own capabilities as well. But I wouldn't go too much into speculation in that, because at the moment it's very difficult to say why certain things happen. For sure, the use of a missile like Storm Shadow on a refineries proved that drones are very effective in saturating airspace, and they can deliver, especially not too far away, so not over 1,000 kilometer, but within 500 kilometer, they can deliver for sure a significant warhead in terms of dimensions. But in long range, of course, the Ukrainians still have a lack, which I hope they will fill, because as we discussed a lot in our Discord chats and privately, the necessity of having a ballistic missile or a cruise missile, maybe both is better, that can be used in very long range, so 1,000 kilometer plus, would give to Ukraine a significant hedge in capacity, essentially, to strike very hardened facilities like a refinery.
Yeah, so I think, like, to summarize, not the first time Ukraine has used Storm Shadow inside Russian territory, but we think maybe the first time they've used it against an actual refinery target, but we're not 100% sure on that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much that. Does anyone have an answer to what's keeping Europe from going into like a war footing industry? It would also boost the European economies. Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. We talk about it a lot. I think right now, yeah, Europe is still dealing with Ukraine more like it's like a crisis, sort of like, I mean, it's not even as big as COVID in terms of financials yet, but they're treating it more like that kind of a thing, where like a crisis hits and they go, oh, we got to deal with this with policy. They're not treating it like what it is, which is effectively a war on NATO and Western Europe. And moving more towards an actual proper wartime footing, where they're not taking kind of 2 years to do everything, would definitely improve the situation for Ukraine pretty markedly. And what's preventing Europe from doing that? I would say probably political will. I don't think. I mean, the Europeans are already having a tough time getting their electorates to maintain the commitments that they've made already. And I think that the governments in power are currently like worried about increasing those commitments, because it'll be used by opposition parties to claim that the government's like, taking people's tax money and spending it on some foreign war, right? Something like that. So I would say that Europe has so far not gone into a proper mentality about this, beyond just being a regional crisis, into a full scale, like, this is a war on Europe, which is bad. They should do that. And the thing that's preventing them is like political will. Erlend, you probably have the hottest takes on this, but if anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, it's political will, and it's not just about the mode that one needs to be set in. I think it's purely an amount of money that needs to be allocated that is unfortunately not within the political will of Europe right now. There's been a few good news from mainly Northern European countries, but still no large response to that the US is actually has left the alliance in the sense that they stopped providing any assistance to Ukraine that they pay for. So there's been no response to that, in my opinion. The Pulse program is some sort of a crisis management scheme, as you kind of called the whole the whole situation. But I think it is. It's not even filling the gaps of what Ukraine needs, and it's not only about problems with accessing US technology and weaponry. It's also about the amount of money that is being allocated. Yes, $10 billion sounds like a lot, but it's actually a very small amount of what is needed. So I think Colby is probably the best person to answer the questions about industry.
So I'll say a few things about this question. So number one, it is important to remember, and we're all guilty of this. I know I'm guilty of this, to not treat Europe as a monolith, because it isn't. And again, we're all, I know I'm definitely guilty of it, at least saying of, Europe is doing X or Europe needs to do Y. And obviously, due to the existence of the EU, Europe is, in some ways, yes, there are, sort of monolithic aspects to what's happening on the continent that aren't applicable to other places around the world, because the EU is a thing. There is central governance, in a way that doesn't exist for other looser organizations. But there's a very clear divide, sort of east-west, north-south a little bit as well, where if you look at countries like the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and some others, they are already at or are pretty rapidly approaching as much of a war footing as a country can get without, being under direct kinetic attack on the level that Ukraine has been experiencing for 3 years now. So some countries are there more or less, but others obviously aren't. And the problem is that the countries that aren't are the bigger countries, the bigger economies, the more wealthy countries, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain. All of the continent's largest economies are not on that same level, and all of them have taken steps, to be sure, and Germany certainly stands out as one that has made the most significant transformation of those major economies. And the United Kingdom stands out being one that has really led the way in resolve and being just unwavering and willing to take more decisive action, leading on Storm Shadow, a good example. But the UK is really not investing what they need to be. Their budgetary allocations, their resources just don't really match that. So we still have this very significant imbalance east to west, and then even among those Western European states, there's a lot of variation, with Germany doing quite a lot, probably still not nearly as much as they should, but the scale of Germany's investments from where they were pre-war to now are quite astounding. And you can, our friend and colleague Jeff has been doing a very good job documenting the astounding pace as of late of German rearmament. So Europe is doing things, and how much they're doing, again, there's a divide there, sort of east and west. But I would say that the fundamental problem that's as Joseph said, it's political will. Erlend agreed it's a political will problem. I agree it's a political will problem. So the fundamental problem here, which is what explains why we're not seeing the level of investment in Europe's defense industry and their defense capabilities, is that, again, these Western European states are treating what's happening in Ukraine as a war that is happening to Ukraine and not a wider Russian war against all of Europe and really all of Western civilization, because the United States is not excluded from this either. Russia is already at war with all of us. This is not a war just on Ukraine. They're fighting a war against all of us, but many of our countries are still treating this like it's just something that's happening to Ukraine, and we're trying to manage the potential ramifications of that, the fallout, trying to contain it, trying to keep it as just something that's happening to Ukraine, and we're trying to help Ukraine survive it, rather than what is actually happening, which is that Russia's war in Ukraine is just one part of a larger war against all of us. And this war is already kinetic. Russians are engaged in direct action sabotage against Western states, including the United States. So again, not just Europe. Europe is not only at war against Europe. Russia is also already at war with the United States. There are cyber attacks sponsored by Russian military intelligence that are happening against the United States of America. So this isn't a war. There is already kinetic action happening. There are sabotage efforts to kill people in the United States and Europe and destroy infrastructure. So it is incorrect to just deem this as sort of hybrid gray zone tactics. No, this is a framing that is very beneficial for Russia. It is already a kinetic war against all of us, not just Ukraine. And the fundamental problem is that all of the major power players are basically just treating it like it's a war only against Ukraine, and we are all just witnesses to it rather than being participants in the war ourselves. And that needs to change in order for the broader public to understand that there needs to be much more significant investments in all of our own security, because it's not just Ukraine, it's all of us, and we will be next.
Yeah, this danger, of course, is especially accelerated when you have, first of all, incompetent people trying to negotiate some sort of peace plan that is incredibly dangerous in itself. But when Europe, or many countries in Europe, are still uncertain about if they want to have a credible defense or not. And I want to mention that Italy right now is in a situation where the Defense Committee has basically not approved of the government's rearmament plan, and there is a majority in the parliament for cutting in the defense spending with regards to the 2025 budget versus the 2026 budget. Italy has also more or less announced that they will be not providing any military assistance to Ukraine. That's actually a part of the fact that they don't want to spend much on defense. That's not what Meloni wants, but it's what the government ends up probably going for, because there is no majority in the parliament for what Meloni wants to do. So that tells us a lot about unresolved in certain countries in Europe. Obviously, France and Italy are not in a good situation. France and the UK are also not in a good situation, but at least they're doing something, right? I guess
Is France doing something?
Well, a little bit, at least.
I will say, just on Italy, and then we can go to Daniela. I think that we shouldn't jump the gun and assume that military assistance from Italy to Ukraine is over. And I'll just note that a lot of what Italy has provided has been very under the radar, and so what is officially being stated by some politicians and what language might get inserted into legislation, I think that there's a disconnect there with what we're actually going to see happen on the ground. But time will tell for that. But that's what I hear from people in Italian military circles.
Yeah, it's true that they don't announce a lot of stuff that they're providing, but we'll see what happens. There is no agreement for the next year's budget, so things can still change.
If I can shine some positiveness on these, in reality, the Italian system is a mess. So it's very likely that the law that many have seen today will be very much different from what will be voted. There will be negotiations. So I'm not 100% sure that there will be no budget for Ukraine at all, because there will be pressure inside the government to do something. So the main problem is that it will be not as much as was before, and probably is not a good signal to your allies that you are not committed to essentially put resources into military assistance, which is very important, especially in a moment where US support is essentially over physically. In terms of UK, yes, the situation here is not ideal, because the economy is very much on the lower side, despite we are kind seeing the end of the recession, but it's always very hard to say at this point. But the problem is that the commitment in terms of resources is a barely 0.2%, which for everyone into the defense sector is just a joke, because they keep saying, oh, it's the largest increase in spending since the end of the Cold War. Yes, it's true, but there is also inflation. So the problem is that 0.2% is literally very, very small. On the other regards, I have to say that there have been a significant amount of investment in the supply chain, in the creation of new factories, in particular for drone, gun barrels, ammunition, a new extension of the AWE, the Atomic Weapon Establishment, which silently is expanding at an incredible speed for different reasons. There have been a lot of work, also pushed by private sector like MBDA and other companies that on their will they are investing in increasing production. In some cases there are also investment from the government, and we are talking about 500 million each time, so in the end they pile up very quickly. But the problem is that we don't have artillery, for example. We don't have sufficient IFVs. We don't have sufficient tanks. Even ships is probably going to become an issue if any type of kinetic confrontation start, let's say, in the next 18 months, because I don't think Type 45 will be back before that. And UK has literally no air defense on ground. We have Sabre. We ordered the not new system, but a few launcher more, which is okay, are good things, but it's not ideal. So the problem is that UK is in a less dramatic situation than Germany, and but is also further behind the line, let's say. So it has some kind of reduced pressure on that. Germany, on the other side, started these with a very bad situation in terms of procurement, in terms of the ammo stored, even. So they had to invest much more, to arrive to a point to be effective. I think in general, Europe has has an illusion that is not on Russian intention. The Russian intention is exactly crystal clear. The problem is that about the time, and we discussed with you, Erlend, many times about the time that we have to prepare. And I think one of the issues that the European government, they are trying to create this illusion that there is a 5 year, 10 years time to be ready. And as we spoke with many attendees to the podcast, this is an illusion because we see the Russian improvement in their war industry every day, every month, year by year. Now it's 3 years that we're monitoring this, and the scale of development is unseen in Europe. So this is a signal of commitment. For Russia, this is an existential problem, is an existential fight. Europe should move to a pace that is completely different because it's existential for us as well, not only as a single nation, but as a balance into the world, because the world that we know today, which is based also on agreement on different international law, is based on the fact that we know that we all have to comply with international rule. These guys, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, they want to, and many others, they want to dismantle this and replace with something different, which is an order based on strength and force. And we know how these will end up. So the problem is, do we have governments? Because the Colby is right. One of the biggest issues of Europe, and in particular European Union, is very fragmented. It's very difficult for European Union to make cohesive decision because everyone has its own view on a problem, and also we have that we have to be honest, Orban and Fico, but even Salvini from Lega now is openly pro-Russian, literally openly. We have a Farage, UK. Okay, it's not European Union, but this is a very big threat because the UK is the only other nuclear power in Europe. So, and also it's the only one that officially will defend any other country. France has a different policy on that. I'm sure they will, but on paper it's different from UK. UK will intervene anyway. So it's a very dangerous time, and I understand that government want to try to have some balance to try to don't foster more, don't increase more the relevance of these parties across Europe. But it's also a problem because we are not preparing at enough time, and if war start, we may start the war with much less preparation than what we should have.
Okay, thanks, guys. So yeah, I think it's a good question. Thanks, chat, for the question. So we have our last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Stanimir, we'll turn it over to you. What's the current weather like in Ukraine or that general area right now? The question was, has winter been cold there yet? Any reports on how the Russians are holding on to their toes this winter?
In terms of how they're holding on to their toes, it's more difficult this year than it's been in the previous year. I have something like 15 to 20% increase depending on the week in terms of outages of electricity, heating, or water supply. Weather-wise, I think the snow came later this year. Right now they have a lot of blizzards and storms, but I think it's a bit warmer than it has been in the previous years. But they still have problems. Like I didn't post this week like last week, but right now the biggest issue is that this week 85,000 people in Saratov, and let me check the population of Saratov. I think it's close to 1 million. But yeah, a considerable part of Saratov didn't have heating for more than a few days. So let's say 10% of the city didn't have heating, and they rely on central heating for the city. So yeah, they have significant outages. Cities with up to 100 to 200,000 have had their entire heating network being offline or being threatened to be offline. I think the biggest example was in Oryol, where the local heating plant was taken offline by a Ukrainian drone strike. So yeah, this year is worse for Russians significantly. But like I said again, the winter isn't as bad, but how they're faring is worse.
Okay, thanks, Stanimir. So that wraps up our stream for this week. We're going to get going. We'll see everyone, of course, next week, same time, 2100 Kyiv time. Thanks, of course, to our chat for all your great questions and for tuning in live. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for everyone watching the videos after the fact. Thanks to our illustrious panel, which includes Germany to Ukraine's not here. I don't have to say it. Thanks to just our panel and not me. And we'll see everyone next week, same time. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
Героям слава.
And Happy New Year.
On behalf of the brave.